University of Limpopo. Great to have you with us once again, Victor. Good Friday afternoon to you.
Friday is always the best time of the week, Thami. Good afternoon.
It certainly is. I think this is probably also the best time for Kenya right now with the with the
Yeah.
discovery of what is the largest gold deposit for them in decades.
Yeah, it's then in the Kakamega County, which is in the west of the country, not far from Victoria Falls, if I may, just to give the listeners an idea of where this county is. It's Shanta Gold, a British company. They're talking about a 5.29 billion gold discovery. Large underground mine. They're going to use what they call long-hole stoping technology, which means they go underground, but they do not cause a lot of disruption on the surface. And it makes sense because they are not far from Victoria Lake, Lake Victoria, which is a huge heritage site, important for fishing in that area. So they are talking about 1.27 million ounces of gold, which could mean they could produce something like 1,500 tons per day of gold. And that's where the company is headed. Hopefully 3% of that going into royalties into the government of Kenya. Kenya has not really done a lot for mining. I mean, it has the resources, but it has just never somehow managed to catch on. I recall talking to the CEO of the mining Chamber of Mines, or whatever the equivalent is, more than 10 years ago. And I just can't tell you exactly what they're doing. Often when they try to mine, they run into either tribal land where the people, Maasai, will say this is of spiritual importance, or they run into the Kikuyu who will say we value this as our shrine, or something. Something always seems to get in the way. So let's hope that this one will at least go some respectable distance, because having resources underground, if you're not mining or exploiting them, will not help the economy in any way.
And I mean, that is worth an estimated $5.29 billion.
Yeah,
So what then
yeah.
would be the way forward post a discovery of this nature?
No, they remember mining is very expensive. If they have already done the exploration, that's the most expensive part, the exploration, the upstream business of this, because that's where you have to prove that you're physical and prove to the financier that there is gold underground and it can be mined. It's in the quantities, what do they call it, economically viable quantities. So it won't be a futile thing. Now they've worked out the technology. What's left is, I think, to negotiate the license to get the land acquisition going so that the land can be transferred for use by the mining company. And then you are A for away. But I think they will be arguing about the royalties a bit, because if you look at what's happening in Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, where countries, the governments have been able to get 15% free carry in shareholdings, then they might be stuck at that level. But once they resolve it, there are seemingly all the technologies in place and the expertise to make this a reality.
And moving on now to Dangote, we actually spoke about him yesterday and the strides that he's made and the investments that he's made in Zimbabwe. But this time, we know that Dangote has really been dominating in the cement industry on the continent, but competition intensifying in this area.
Yeah, Amsons Group, it's a Tanzanian company which has bought 29.2% additional stake in the East African Portland Company, which is quite a long and old cement. They bought from Associated International Cement Limited and a company called Cementia Holdings. The deal is about $5.6 million. And I mean, 5.6 billion, and it is going to be giving them this percentage that it's not really going to make any difference, because the infrastructural development in Tanzania, in Kenya, in that East African region, or if we can say in the Great Lakes region, whether you include Ethiopia as part of the East African community, is huge. So there's a lot of demand for cement. Bear in mind, cement goes into everything from mining to building residential to building infrastructure, roads, ports, harbors. So if you just look at how much of a construction industry is taking place in that area, Dangote has just been having a free reign because he's dominant, but this is just going to create competition. What it means, it will be better for people who are in construction, because they at least will be able to get competition on pricing and be able to afford the inputs much better.
And good news for Nigeria as well, having made developments now, having their first locally owned floating production, storage and offloading vessel.
Yeah, exactly. You know, if you read about the Nigerian oil industry, you hear all the time about bunkering, where people go target a pipeline and they punch a hole into it and siphon it and sell it privately. Now, when you use what they call FPSO, it's almost like, when you look at Thami, when you look at the tanker that moves around and mixes concrete while on the move, those kinds of, that's the closest I can get to the floating production, storage, and offloading vessel in the oil industry. It allows you to store oil, process it while you're on the move, so you don't need a huge pipeline from the coast to inland and vice versa. You can almost load the crude oil and process it, if you like, while you are on your way to where you have to offload it, whether you're loading it onto a ship for export or you are taking it off a ship and then you're developing it. So it's a very important development because it can process about millions and millions of barrels per day. But it's just going to go in line with what they call the project 1 million barrels that was launched in October last year. But it's just getting the technology right so that you don't need pipelines because all those are subject to vandalism. So $315 million investment by a company called Oriental Energy Resources, the Nigerian company.
And as we log off for this week, our final focus is on North Africa's oil giant, that's Libya's Zalaf Oil and Gas Company. First for them too.
Yeah, first export, 600,000 barrels per day premium hydrocarbons. Is a subsidiary of the National Oil Corporation, so it's a state ownership. They made a deal. The company we're talking about was I think part of the 1968 first discoveries, but they made a deal with the American company called Honeywell. It's quite an established company which has all the technology in a $500 million investment deal, and they are celebrating the fact that they've been able to export their first batch or their first consignment. Bear in mind, Libya used to be a top producer of oil, and after the deposing of Muammar Gaddafi, the industry has been struggling to recover, and that's why this is a milestone. The quantities are not huge, but at least they are saying we are back in action, we are operating, and the mainstay of the Libyan economy will be restored. It's in the Sirte region, which is about 500 kilometers east of Tripoli, the capital.
Victor Kgomoeswana, always a pleasure keeping us abreast of all the top business stories on the African continent. Until next week, give yourself a great weekend ahead.
You have a good weekend, Thami. Bye-bye.
Thank you. That's Victor Kgomoeswana, author of Africa is Open for Business and Africa Bounces Back. He's also the Executive Director for Marketing and Communication at the University of Limpopo.